Okay, amazing. Well, welcome everyone to our webinar, Removing Barriers and Improving Hiring Practices. Good to see all of us joining. As you see, we have our panelists here, Tommy, George, and Amos. I feel it'd be nice to do some introductions. So I'll start with Tommy, just have a little intro.
Hi, everyone. Nice to be here this morning. Thank you for having me, BPIC. So I'm Tommy Aide. I'm the Membership Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Manager at RSES. I've been there now for a couple of years, and my role is essentially, we have a membership of 145,000 globally. And our specific strategies essentially is to ensure that as we grow our membership across the globe, that membership becomes inclusive for many business reasons, but ultimately to represent the built environment in the way in which the built environment needs to be represented, which is around diversity, equity, inclusion, so that the buildings and the ways in which we operate in spaces are a representative of the world that we live in. So yeah, I'm happy to be here on the panel and to share my thoughts on this particular topic.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you, Tommy. George, you can go next.
Yeah, brilliant. Hi, everyone. I'm George. I'm a civil servant. I work in the government property profession. So our organisation supports all of government, regardless of department, to recruit, select, develop, and progress its property workforce. And my role specifically leads resourcing and EDI, those kind of key work streams for government property professionals. And very similar to what Tony's talked about is we have a government profession of about 7,000 people, quite a significant part of government workforce, but also I guess a big player in construction and property sector overall. So really important parts of our work streams are driving the appropriate levels of diversity and representation in the workforce through various different initiatives, including kind of specific stuff in resourcing, which kind of I'll share some thoughts and practice on as part of this webinar and the Q&A. My background, actually, I've been in construction and property as a recruiter and as an HR professional for about 15 years. So I understand the sector really well, as well as being kind of in the kind of recruitment space. So yeah, looking forward to kind of sharing thoughts and having a bit of discussion about it as we go through.
Amazing. Thank you, George. And then we'll go with Amos.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Amos here at BP Network. My background engineering, so I'm a mechanical engineer. That's my background, and been practicing since graduating from Loughborough Uni, which was back in 2011. Which has been really good. And then I joined the construction industry, and working and mostly making involved in the technical services aspects of things on projects, which has been really great up to now. And so we'll still do that. Still have a team working on the sites, but I'm also now working quite closely with a big team as well. And the whole remit is looking at people coming into the sector, how they stay in, best practice, and all the other elements that go alongside with it.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you all for your amazing introductions. So we're going to head straight into the questions, and we have a few questions here when it comes to recruitment. So we start off with setting the scene. So our first question for our panelists, when we talk about removing barriers in recruitment, what do you think is the biggest obstacle preventing organizations from turning good intentions into meaningful action? So I think we'll start off with you, Tommy, on that question.
No problem. I think from my perspective, working in the space in terms of in the built environment, specifically in construction, I'm always going to look at things from an inclusion lens, because I think that a barrier to recruitment is the amount of people you can get into a business, right? And then obviously retain in a business. And I think some organizations have good intentions, but haven't embedded inclusion into their systems. Because it can be seen as inclusion is separate and then, recruitment is a separate thing. Whereas what I often fit is that for a business, you need a culture fit. So what essentially is your culture for a business, and how can you add to that culture in terms of the people and the resources that you get in? So I think there's still unconscious bias. I think that's a very real thing. I think that people don't want to acknowledge it in terms of that is a barrier for recruitment, because people perceive X person to be this way, and therefore I don't know if they can join the business, etc., or in terms of their recruitment processes have unconscious bias embedded in those systems. So I think that is also a reason as well. And I also think that there's a lack of measuring of data in businesses that basically will analyze where the barriers are. From my perspective, we have a sustainability survey that we do in terms of across the built environment, and we get the results of that every year. And essentially that's done by Action Sustainability, so the sustainability school. And what we see from those results, which are really interesting, is that recruitment processes for specific demographics. So for example, this is basically the results, and I think it's open for people to have a look at it, but essentially it breaks down ethnicity. So we can see that from that demographic survey that is across the built environment, Bangladeshi, for example, are 100-to-1 applications compared to their white counterparts who might be 20-to-1 in terms of diversity, in terms of to hire, basically. So what we can see from that is that specific ethnicities are not being hired based on the fact that there are recruitment biases, and then the data allows us to see how ethnicities are treated in those recruitment processes. So I think lack of measurement, unconscious bias, and then accountability. So once we have all that information in terms of recruitment, we then see there's sometimes a lack of accountability to acknowledge, wait, these people or these groups of people are not being hired because of XY reason. Do we want to acknowledge that? And what can we do about our processes to ensure that this is not happening, or that we change what is happening? So I think those are the real barriers in terms of inclusion to me. And I think what we should view it as in terms of when we look at recruitment is that inclusion adds to the business strategy and strength, and it's not just a DI objective. Because if we're more inclusive in our practices, we're able to have a wider talent pool, which then allows us to have the best candidates for various roles. But then also having a diverse business gives us diverse perspectives and then more reach in terms of clientele as well. So those are my perspective on the barriers to recruitment.
Amazing, amazing. That's a great answer. Thank you, Tommy. George, any thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I mean, that was a great answer. So,
Yes.
how do I follow that? Other than to say, I mean, I agree with everything that Tony said. I think from a perspective of as a recruiter by trade in our sector, and also the perspective of someone that kind of leads a team of trying to push best practice out into different organizations across government. I think building on some of the stuff that Tony said, there is a real disconnect, and it's a practical disconnect, I think, between intention and strategy and desire to have an inclusive workplace and sounds awful, but sell that inclusivity, to have an effective EDI strategy and action plan. I think certainly from a government perspective, it won't surprise anybody to hear that the intention is absolutely there, and that's a great start, right? But I think there's a practical disconnect between that intention and even kind of recruitment experts who want to get this right and want to bring the right people in because they're measured on it, that their kind of modus operandi, and the people actually doing the recruitment. And I think Tony's kind of touched on it already. And there's thing I'll talk about in later questions, things like unconscious bias. I think the processes, maybe are they right? How are we approaching recruitment? What do we actually want from recruiting this role? Again, touch on that in later questions. But for me, the biggest barrier to being able to make meaningful change is the practical disconnect between this is what we'd love to do, this is what we'd love to have, this is what we'd love the impact of all these different initiatives to be, and actually doing it. Because, and final thought from me on this question, I think, is everybody around this table knows when you have to recruit, it's an add-on to your day job when you have to recruit into your team. So that means there's time pressures, that means there are competing priorities, and it's so easy to just go, do you know what? I'll just grab the template from when we recruited this person 3 years ago and just reuse it again. Just so many problems associated with that. To Tony's point, from an actual strategic point of view and an impact, are we getting the right people point of view? But also in this context, a real problem with things move on in 3 years, and if we're always using the same processes, we're always going to kind of get the same outcome with its associated flaws. So that disconnect for me is a big barrier, is a big problem.
Yeah, yeah. I think Tommy touched on a lot of things, which is good. Thank you, George. Amos, any thoughts to the question as well?
Yeah, so for me, the question was, what's the barriers, isn't it, to recruitment?
Yeah,
And I think amongst everything that's been said, one of the biggest barriers for me is the source of that recruitment. And a lot of the recruitment is being done through either external recruitment agencies or labor suppliers, or whichever way it is. And I think that needs to be looked at in terms of the actual source, because the actual source can be a barrier on its own, by itself, similar to perhaps how, before Uber, there was a lot of people that, for example, were struggling to call a taxi or to do lots of things, in regards to taxis that are happening now, because Uber then offered a different solution to that. So because when Uber wasn't there, it doesn't mean those issues didn't exist. It did, but there wasn't a different solution to it. And then when Uber came, people can call their taxi at home. You can call it the convenience of where you are. You can pay by card. You can do all these things, which then allowed the existing systems to then kind of level up how they are approaching things. So at the moment, I actually think the source of how people are getting their skills in itself is a barrier that is really never looked at that much. So in some instances, we'll speak to a company or organizations that really have the best intents to be inclusive, and it all falls apart when it actually comes to, okay, here are the people, get them in, and then the whole story begins about, all right, so we got this in place, speak to that agency that we work with, that's on our PSL, and then it can fall apart at that point. But it doesn't mean people are not there. So the mechanism of getting people in itself is a barrier. That's what I would say.
yeah, yeah. Thank you, Amos, for that great answer. Moving on, next, we want to talk about challenging the recruitment practices. So, as you know, many organizations say that they want to attract diverse talent, but where do you think is the biggest barriers that still exist in attraction, in recruitment, selection or progression? What practical changes have you seen that's made that greatest difference? I think we'll start from Amos and then go back to Tommy.
Right. So you're saying, because I think there's 2-3 questions in there.
Yeah.
So what are the practical things?
Yeah, what are the practical changes you've seen make like the greatest difference in recruitment practices?
Yeah, so I think for working across different organizations, I think the intent is really key. So as a change on its own, the intention of, because thing is the process of actually recruiting, getting people in, the culture and all that, it's a process of its own, and without the right intent and the intensity behind it, sometimes it doesn't kind of fulfill itself. So in instances where I've seen the leadership really take ownership of this and say, look, this is what we're doing. Because everything is always going to have its little nuances and little difficulties in terms of ironing out the process, and it needs that sort of level of intent and intensity behind it to actually make it happen. So you say, okay, in this workplace, this is what we need. This is how we're going to get there. The honest truth is, there's so many people out there who are willing, who want to join the sector. There's so many, like every day you probably see Wednesday night just coming in. It's not actually a shortage of people. There's just so many people daily. We just had an open morning this morning, and we had about 15, 20 people that just turned up, and they're like, look, yes, I'm ready, I'm looking at this, and other. Because I actually thought it's going to be a few people that turn up actually, because it was a last minute invite that we did. So people are there, they're actually there, but it's so the greatest people that I've seen make a significant difference is the intention behind it. So for example, you see a lot in politics at the moment that there's a lot of, especially for the Conservative Party, there's a lot of ethnic minority leaders now that you see. So whether you agree with them or not, you've got the likes of, James Cleverly, Kevin Badenoch, all those people that have come up That was actually an intentional thing that was created to say, look, we really want to change this, we want to shift this. I think that was about 15 years ago, actually. People are just seeing the fruits of it. So whether you agree with their politics or not, that's a separate thing. But there was an intent to say we want to open up a bigger pipeline of people from different backgrounds to come into politics. And we're seeing the fruits of that now across the spectrum. So if you look at all the political parties now, they've benefited from that. Some people that even with reform, for example, ethnic minorities, they actually came from the Conservative Party's intent to get those. So this is just an example of something that is out there in the media, so people can get a sense of it. So I'll say that's a big difference there.
Yeah, thank you so much, Amos. George, any thoughts to the question as well?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point, isn't it, that Amos makes around there are people wanting to get into the sector, and the link made there about kind of visibility of role models in the right place. I think there is something there, and certainly in that broader attraction piece into the sector. I think I'll kind of come at this from a from the angle of where we have on a vacancy level roles where we can't hire for potential and hire for attitude. There are plenty of those in the sector where we can, but where we can't, for me, the biggest difference, and I see in different organizations within government, is comes from intent, comes from the strategic drivers that I talked about in the first question. But what that then drives early intervention. So recruitment experts, EDI experts working together to intervene early in workforce planning, in succession planning, and in particular in recruitment practice, so that we avoid what's called, and this is a George phrase, this is not an official phrase, but I call it the Trevor bias, and there are other names and individuals are available. But what I mean by that is, I touched on it a little bit earlier, is it's really easy. Someone called Trevor, who's been in the business for 15 years, is a real expert in what he does, has developed these skills and this experience of 15 years in the organization doing what he does, hands his notice in or retires and says, I'm going. The temptation is for that hiring manager and that team and that organization to go, well, I just need another Trevor. Well, actually, what that's creating is, Tony touched on unconscious bias. It's creating a really narrow tunnel vision of what is it that we actually need to bring into the organization at this point. And I know I'm talking about a specific vacancy example, but actually this is across the piece. When you go bigger picture and more strategic, what is it that the organization actually needs? What is it that this vacancy actually needs? And if we have early intervention and the intent from senior leaders to drive that early intervention from recruitment and EDI and inclusivity experts, to sit with the hiring manager and say, actually, Trevor was brilliant, and when we brought him in 15 years ago, and he's continued to be brilliant, but actually what we need moving forward for the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years is perhaps a shift in this, and perhaps a different skill set, and perhaps a different background, perhaps a different life experience to bring diversity of thought into this role. So for me, I don't want to take up more time than I should, and want to give Tony time to answer this question. So I'll wrap up by saying it's early intervention in recruitment practice by experts to work with and partner with business units or individual hiring managers to really think about removing the bias from the process and think about what is it we actually need, bring back a bit more objectivity into the process, so we can bring in the best people, the right people for the job in a fair and open way.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you, George. Tommy, if you had anything to add on to that?
Yeah, I think when I think about the biggest barriers, I think about the things that have been happening since age old. And I think attraction has improved in terms of within the industry, but I think selection and progression still remain the biggest challenges. And the specific reason why is that we have mixed genders in the built environment. But let's say we take women, for example, who have been in the built environment, there's still issues with progression and development. And if some people choose to be care leavers, for example, and I say women because obviously we have like a pool of women who exist in the built environment, who are talented, who are part of, the built environment, but yet when it comes to things like caring responsibilities, we're still finding situations that have been around for hundreds of years, still impacting women's progression and development within the built environment, which for me just sounds archaic, because if we know things already happen and exist in our social society, why is it that we make it a problem when they happen within businesses? It should be infrastructure in a business that both people, different genders, can take care and responsibility. So I think when we think about practical improvements, it includes diverse minds in terms of creating the solutions together. So not just one gender specific, but diversity in terms of making those decisions. We need to be able to be clear and transparent with certain progression criteria, because at times, is it just who knows who, or is it a skill-based progression system in place for people that can develop regardless of your background, gender, socioeconomics, etc. And I think it's about making sure that when we look at recruitment, when we look at pipeline, we're really ensuring that retention is a part of the strategy. So ensuring that at certain stages, there are room for development, and that is clear in within process and within policy within businesses.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you, Tommy. Thank you, George. Thank you, Amos. Moving on to our next question. We'll probably take a couple more questions for our Q&A session. This next question in regards to leadership and accountability. Creating inclusive recruitment isn't just obviously an HR responsibility, but what role should leaders and hiring managers play in ensuring recruitment processes are fair, inclusive, and are free from bias? We'll start with George this time.
Yeah, I think all three of us have probably touched on this in different ways already, to be honest. For me, I'll be quick on this. I've already mentioned what I think the role of hiring managers is. Look, hiring managers are super busy. They have day jobs to do, and quite often the people that they're not recruitment experts, right? They just need the benefit of the best recruitment. Hiring managers is about open-mindedness, and it's about proactivity in when we talk about recruitment. I think leaders really, again, for me, really easy one to talk about. The difficulty is the practical implementation. Tommy's touched on this already loads, she hit the nail on the head way better than I probably could. For me, leadership, it's about visibility. It's not just about the leaders taking accountability, but ensuring that people all through the organization take accountability. And it's about being strong with these things. And good examples that I've seen in government are where there are really strong people who come through on a shortlist for really critical jobs, but there is a department I won't name because they're not here, but there's a department that have a policy for key decision-making roles in property that the shortlist must be gender diverse. And there's been 2 or 3 occasions where this organisation has had an all-male shortlist of people whose applications were very good, very strong, very technically competent, and they've gone back to the drawing board and said, we're not moving forward until this shortlist is gender diverse. It's a granular level example, right? It's a day-to-day, it's operational example, but it's stuff like, it's the confidence and the bravery and the attitude of the leadership in that organization that has said, I know that we could appoint somebody good, but how do we know this is the right person? And how do we know that the right people are able to have felt able to apply for this role if we're not pushing through this gender diversity and shortlist space? So I think it's hiring managers, proactivity, open-mindedness. Leadership is about them taking accountability and pushing accountability right through the hiring chain, right through the recruitment and attraction chain, right through the culture, inclusion and general HR space, and being brave and sticking to those principles and having outcome of diversity and inclusion and equity across the workforce, not just in the recruitment chain, as kind of #1 outcome. And then as a result, we'll know we've got the right people in those roles, and that the right people have had the opportunity and have been able to access that application process.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you, George. Tommy, you got anything else to add to George's answer?
Yeah, I think that was really inclusive of, like, in terms of the whole question. I think I would just add, I think for me, on a personal note, I spent a lot of my career trying to basically open and creating pathways for young people and underrepresented groups to be in the built environment. And I've seen firsthand what happens like when organizations actually take a moment to look at potential rather than just the CVs and just who's come from what specific university. So what I would say is that I think the talent pool is a lot wider than what we think of. So for example, for us at RSES, before I've joined, we always would look at certain universities, certain kind of places where everybody always would come from. And I think, which is fantastic, everybody deserves those opportunities. But what I realized is that there were also, because I had worked in grassroots, ground level organizations, I also was able to bring it up that maybe there's opportunities to look at outside of what we're used to, the traditional roles, the traditional universities, colleges, etc., etc. And what that generated is what we decided to do is create a platform on RSS Recruit, which is already a brand hub for employers, and essentially create a web page on that hub that already attracts thousands of employers to showcase grassroots organizations. So organizations that already are working with hard to reach talent, already have access to communities, already have access to talent that want to get into construction or want to get into the built environment. And what we're doing, rather than being, oh, we're going to save everybody, which I don't think we should be anyways, I think it's always a collaborative effort, is working in partnership with organizations that don't have the capital to promote their marketing or the capital to have the reach, but platforming themselves on RSS Recruit allows talent to see businesses and organizations looking for opportunities, allows them to upskill their talent and be able to know what employers do want, but also bridges a gap and says that we want to have social mobility and bring people together, which I think, like I said, when it goes back to the original question, it's about how do we collaborate to ensure that we're not just focusing on qualification, so to speak, but we're looking at holistic talent, we're looking at collaboration, we're looking at partnerships, and we're looking at how we can bring the industry together from early talent right to senior leadership, right to being employed. So aspiration to access. And I think that's an important part of how we recognize potential and move forward.
Yeah, well said. Thank you, Tommy. And then we'll just finish off with Amos. Amos, I think you're muted.
Yes, we do that. I'll say I like the phrase aspiration to talent that Tony said. I think that's quite good. Remind me the question again. I just want to make sure I answer you.
Yeah, we're just saying what role should leaders and hiring managers play in ensuring recruitment processes are fair, inclusive, and free from bias.
Yeah, and I think that's an important one. I think for me, I'm just going to keep hammering on the same thing. I think the role that the leaders should take in that is it should actually be a priority to them in the first place, because paperwork, process, and all that, that's very easy to kind of dish out and say, yeah, I really care about it and all that sort of stuff. But I think there's got to be that level of that intention. If their role is actually something that's a priority to you, to kind of get that. I think that's the thing behind it, because in creating so much process and bureaucracy, that's an easy way to hide, basically, because anyone can create a process that will seem fair if they don't want to do something. So they just going to create a matrix or a film to fill out and all these things. So that's very easy to do, and saying, oh, and it's all the practical skills that you have to say, a panel is supposed to be like this, and that. But I think it's the intent of, do they actually want to make it happen? So if their role to ask themselves that question, to say, do you really want to make your organization go through all this for nothing because you don't really need it? You just want to comply. You still wasting resources anyway, in time. That, or do you really want to do it properly? I think that's a fair question for leaders to be asking themselves, in terms of what one. So my answer to that question it sounds like really simple, but I think that's really where it starts. Because if that's where you see the frustration. So you see people saying, oh, things have been going on for so long, but we're not seeing any change, or all this thing that people say, but it's because It was never the intent in the first place. The intent was just basically to comply, rather than to actually bring any significant change. And that just leads to a lot of frustration. And with a lot of frustration, you get to low retention levels, people will leave, and you got the service kind of go around again. So I think that's really kind of where it starts in terms of that intent. It's worked well when it's things like health and safety, where the intent was really low, and then it came to obviously compliance, and then it came to organizations actually saying we want to be the best at this. And then you start seeing like good shift on that.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you, Amos. Just to close off the our last question, more like a closer reflection. If every organization watching today, obviously you have a few people from different organizations watching, which is good. If every organization was watching today committed to making one meaningful change to improve their hiring processes over the next 12 months, what is something you would encourage them to prioritize and why? We'll start off with Tommy, then go to George and finish off with Amos.
What I would say, especially within the built environment, is that I think it's really key to collaborate. And one of the things that we're doing at RICS is that we have a Be Inclusive, which is an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, with 8 other institutions. So in partnership, which for the next 5 years until 2020, we've started in 2022. We've just renewed the contract end of last year to 2030. And essentially it's CIOB, RICS, REBAR, CIC, ES, CIAT, CIHT, and ICE, LI, and RTPI, and we're all in collaboration to improve recruitment, diversity in the various categories. It's all published online, and I'm able to share it with BPIC and the team. But the reason why I mentioned this is because in collective, our membership is over 450,000. And since we signed this MOU with our CEOs and we're in collaboration, what we're understanding is that we all have similar issues and we don't need to solve those issues independently or in isolation. So what I would recommend for businesses and organizations that are working on their recruitment is how can we collaborate? How can we work with larger groups, smaller groups that are already doing this work, and how can we come together to talk about the solutions, to see what is working somewhere else, and to put this in practice. And not only are we doing that within our institution on an institutional level, we're also doing it with organizations. We're running a social mobility event this summer with the public sector specifically. So we're looking at government, we're looking at public sector recruitment, and we're learning from what they're doing. Last year we did it with the private sector. And so it's really about where can we pick this up from and what is working. And our institution is global. So we're also consulting with our global colleagues around Asia, India, African region, Americas, because it's actually not just specific to our UK structure. It's about business. It's about the built environment, which is a global issue. And if we can learn and work together, so in every stream that I'm working across, in terms of within my role and within the business, we're really looking at how we tackle this in collaboration with institutionally, organizational level, and then global level in terms of solutions as well, and ensuring that we're working in that way, because that is the way to support. So that's what I would encourage business to do. Take a moment to look up and see what others are doing and how can you collaborate so that you don't have to find the solutions on your own.
Great, thank you, Tommy. So moving on to George.
Yeah, what a brilliant point, Tommy. I absolutely love it. I think property and construction as a sector is famous for its sense of community, and we should be making more of that, across organization boundaries, across public-private sector boundaries or lines, if you like. I think there's so much in that collaboration piece. I think building on that, for me, one priority that I would recommend is how accessible do organizations careers and recruitment processes feel to the user. I think there's a big review process that should happen, is not just about how are we recruiting the right skills, is how are we making people feel when they see information about our careers. How are we making people feel, okay, if we get that right and people go, I really want to apply for that, I really want to get in that space, how do we make people feel when they first engage with that recruitment process? Because first point of contact, first interaction is absolutely critical for how people feel about what that organization will look like, and also critical, and it's kind of a critical point on the path of putting people off, and that is one of the big problems, isn't it? Is people don't feel like this process is for them, and therefore the organization and maybe even the sector is for them. So one priority from here, other than what Tomi's already said on that collaboration, because I absolutely agree with that, for me would be review how careers and recruitment processes are perceived by the user at first point of interaction. How does that make them feel about the sector, the organization, and the job role that they're thinking about?
Amazing. Thank you, George. And then just finish off with Amos.
Yeah, so just the question was what one thing that people can take away, isn't it?
Yeah.
To make a change and a difference. Yeah, I would say I don't know what one thing, but if I was put down to one thing, I probably agree with what George was saying in terms of the first interactions with people that are coming through the organization, the messaging that's put across, how people are made to feel from the experience of just hearing people's stories. The main thing people were highlighting is how they're made to feel, and if they feel like they're being seen. Those main two things are basically what people genuinely that makes the difference. And I've asked it to quite a few people actually in a very simplistic way, and that's what's actually come. So you'll be expecting some really complicated answers. But I want to but people are like, I want to feel heard, and I want to feel seen. Those things are like, if you just do that, like they just literally go away. So I asked another lady, like, I'll give me an example, and she was like, oh, when I suggested something, they took it on board. I was like, okay, that's simple. Like, yeah. And they're like, when there was a results, I think there was some money that was saved. They credited her, so that actually they saved this money because of you, it's what you did. And that's such a key factor of people. So if you really think about that, I think that's what as a takeaway in terms of the culture, the organization culture, and how people are made to feel, because when people leave, the retention are quite low in the industry. It's hinging on those two things: how they feel and how if they feel seen. So I think if there's anything else to take those two things to be like, are those being addressed, irrespective of their background and anything. Just consider that from each individual. That's what I would say.
Amazing. Thank you, Amos. Thank you, Tommy. Thank you, George, for these great answers. So that's the last of our questions for the panel. Because obviously I was just thinking about time, but just wanted to ask if anyone else in the audience had a question for Tommy, for George, for Amos. Feel free to press the raise your hand button. If not, can happily close. Andre, you've got a question?
Hi. So it's more reflection, and hi. Apologies, I joined late because I had a sort of clashing commitment. Just I guess in response to the last comment from George and Amos, it's just a thought, may seem a bit obscure, and I understand that there's been focus on partnership with various organizations to recruit. I'm thinking about leveraging power of place in communities, and just wondering whether there's an angle here, recognizing that George is in central government, whether there's an angle to perhaps bring the ministry or communities and local government into the mix, on the basis that they look at communities. You'll have regions within that combined authorities, local authorities that you want to improve outcomes in terms of economic growth, in terms of lifting people out of the needs category, and also for social value. So it's just a thought that perhaps that might be another lever to help drive improvement and adoption of inclusion, particularly because you have a sort of broader discussion at national level around devolution and place-based outcomes. So I just thought that might be perhaps something to consider.
Yeah, Andre, it's I'll just sorry, Wesley, I'll just do a very, very quick answer to that. I think it's a great point. There is an ever increasing focus on this kind of place concept, and while there's a lot of kind of practical challenges around that, including estates and property, you know, for to make the link to the sector itself. There are also strengthening links between central and local government, both through MHCLG and through programs like the One Public Estate and place pilots. And I think you're absolutely right. I think there will be before too long the ability in the vehicles to use to strengthen that connection between central government, local authority, and the community as a I hate to use the commodity phrase, but as a talent pool. For construction and property, definitely, but also just generally to improve that sense of community in place. So it's a great challenge, a great point.
Yeah, thank you, George. Thank you, Andre, for the question.
Yeah, I'll say just to add to that, what Andrew was saying as well. Yeah, I think that connection is often key. And there's often a disconnect as well. Creating like base policies and all that sort of stuff, and then looking at the skills and the talent. It's often a disconnect. So I think having those in the conversation, just to add to that, sorry, was not playing off. It's very key. So yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah, thank you, Amos. Thank you, George. Does anyone else have any more questions for the panelists? Okay, no problem. Well, thank you all for joining. Thank you, Tommy. Thank you, George. Thank you, Amos, for the great answers you've given. But yes, again, thank you all for joining, and looking forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Take care, everyone.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
So
Bye.
much.